Chapter 14. For several subsequent days I saw little of Mr. Rochester. In the mornings he seemed much engaged with business, and in the afternoon, gentlemen from Millcote or the neighborhood called, and sometimes stayed to dine with him. When his sprain was well enough to admit of horse exercise, he rode out a good deal, probably to return these visits, as he generally did not come back till late at night. During this interval, even Adele was seldom sent for his presence, and all my acquaintance with him was confined to an occasional rencontre in the hall, on the stairs, or in the gallery, when he would have sometimes passed me haughtily and coldly, just acknowledging my presence by a distant nod or a cool glance, sometimes bow with a smile, with gentleman-like affability. His changes of mood did not offend me, because I saw that I did nothing to do their alteration. The ebb and flow depended on causes quite disconnected with me. One day he had had company to dinner, and had sent for my portfolio, in order, doubtless, to exhibit its contents. The gentleman went away early to attend a public meeting at Millcote, as Mrs. Fairfax informed me. But the night being wet and inclement, Mr. Rochester did not accompany them. Soon after they were gone, he rang the bell. A message came that I and Adele were to go downstairs. I brushed Adele's hair and made her neat, and having ascertained that I was myself in a usual Quaker trim, where there was nothing to retouch, all being too close and plain, braided locks included, to admit of disarrangement, we descended, Adele wondering whether the petit café was at length come, for owing some mistake, its arrival had hitherto been delayed. She was gratified. There it stood, a little carton on the table, when we entered the dining room. She appeared to know it by instinct. Ma boite, she exclaimed, running towards it. Yes. Oh, sorry, wrong voice. Yes, there is your boite, at last. Take it into the corner, you genuine daughter of Paris, and amuse yourself with disemboweling it, said the deep and rather sarcastic voice of Mr. Rochester, proceeding from the depths of an immense easy chair at the fireside. And mind, he continued, don't bother me with any details of the anatomical process, or any notice of the condition of the entrails. Let your operation be conducted in silence. Tiens toi. Again, I am saying this in a very English accent. I cannot do French accent. Tiens toi tranquille, enfant comprends-tu? Adele seemed scarcely to need the warning. She had already retired to a sofa with her treasure, and was busy tidying the cord which secured the lid. Having removed this impediment and lifted certain silvery envelopes of tissue paper, she merely exclaimed, "Oh ciel! Que c'est bien!" and then remained absorbed in ecstatic contemplation. Is Messiah there? Now demanded the master, half rising from his seat to look round the door, near which I stood. Ah, well, come forward. Be seated there. He drew a chair near his own. I'm not fond of the prattle of children, he continued, for, old bachelor as I am, I have no unpleasant associations connected with their lisp. It would be intolerable to me to pass a whole evening tete exactly where I placed it. If you please. Oh, sorry. Tete with a brat. Don't draw that chair further off, Miss Eyre. Sit down exactly where I placed it, if you please, that is. Ah, confound these civilities. I continually forget them. Nor do I particularly affect simple-minded old ladies. By the by, I must have mine in mind. It won't do to neglect her. She is a Fairfax or wed to one, and blood is said to be thicker than water. He rang and dispatched an invitation to Mrs. Fairfax, who soon arrived, knitting basket in hand. Good evening, madam. I sent to you for a charitable purpose. I have forbidden Adele to talk to me about her presence, and she is bursting with revelation. Have the goodness to serve her as auditress and interlocutrice. It will be one of the most benevolent acts you've ever performed. Adele, indeed, no sooner saw Mrs. Fairfax than summoned her to her sofa, and quickly filled her lap with the porcelain, the ivory, the waxed contents of her boitza, pouring out in meantime explanations and raptures in such broken English as she was mistress of. Now I have performed the part of a good host, pursued Mr. Rochester. Put my guest into the way of amusing each other. I ought to be at library to attend to my own pleasure. Miss Eyre, draw your chair still a little forward. You are yet too far back. I cannot see you without disturbing my position in this comfortable chair, which I have no mind to do. I did as I bid, though I would have much rather remained somewhat in the shade. But Mr. Rochester had such a direct way of giving orders, it seemed a matter of course to obey him promptly. We were, as I have said, in the dining room. The lustre, which had been lit for dinner, filled the room with a feastal breath of light. The large fire was all red and clear. The purple curtains hung rich and ample before the lofty window and loftier arch. Everything was still, save the subdued chat of Adele. She dared not speak loud, and filling up each pause the beating of winter rain against the panes. Mr. Rochester, as he sat in his damask-covered chair, looked different to what I had seen him look before, not quite so stern, much less gloomy. There was a smile on his lips, and his eyes sparkled, whether with wine or not I am not sure, but I think it very probable. He was, in short, in his after-dinner mood, more expanded and genial, and also more self-indulgent than the frigid and rigid temper of the morning. Still, he looked preciously grim, cushioning his massive head against the swelling back of his chair, receiving the light of the fire on his granite-hewn features and in his great dark eyes, for he had great dark eyes, and very fine eyes, too, not without a certain change in their depths sometimes, which, if it is not softness, remind you, at least, of that feeling. He had been looking 2 minutes at the fire, and I had been looking the same length of time at him, when, turned suddenly, he caught my gaze, fastened on his physiognomy. "Excuse me, Miss Eyre," said he. "Do you think me handsome?" I should, if I had deliberated, have replied to this question by something conventionally vague and polite, but the answer somehow slipped from my tongue before I was aware. "No, sir." My word, there is something singular about you, said he. You have the air of a little nonnette, quaint, quiet, grave, and simple. As you sit with your hands before you, and your eyes generally bent on the carpet, except, by the by, when they are directed piercingly to my face, as just now, for instance. And when one asks you a question or makes a remark to which you are obliged to reply, you rap out a round rejoinder which, if not blunt, is at least brusque. What do you mean by it? Sir, I was too plain, I beg your pardon. I ought to have replied that it was not easy to give an impromptu answer to a question about appearances. The tastes differ, that beauty is of little consequence, or something of the sort. You ought to have replied no such thing. Beauty of little consequence indeed. And so, under pretense of softening the previous outrage, of stroking and soothing me into placidity, you stick a ply penknife under my ear. Go on. What fault do you find me with, pray? I suppose I have all my limbs and all my features like any other man. Mr. Rochester, allow me to disown my first answer. I intended no point repartee. It was only a blunder. Just so? I think so, and you shall be answerable for it. Criticize me. Does my forehead not please you? He lifted up the sable waves of hair which lay horizontally over his brow, and showed a solid mass of intellectual organs, but of abrupt deficiency where the suave sign of benevolence should have risen. Now, ma'am, am I a fool? Far from it, sir. You would perhaps think me rude if I inquired in return whether you are a philanthropist. There again! Another stick of the penknife, when she pretended to pat my head, and that is because I said I did not like the society of children and old women. Low it be spoken. No, young lady, I am not a general philanthropist, but I bear conscience. And he pointed to the prominences for which are said to indicate that faculty, and which, fortunately for him, were sufficiently conspicuous, giving indeed a marked breadth to the upper part of his head. And besides, I once had a kind of rude tenderness of the heart when I was as old as you. I was a feeling fellow enough, partial to the unfledged, unfostered, and unlucky. But fortune has knocked me about since, and she has kneaded me with her knuckles. Now I flatter myself I am hard and tough as an India rubber ball. Pervious, though, through chink or two still, and with one sentient point in the middle of a lump. Yes. Does that leave hope for me? Hope of what, sir? Of my final retransformation. From an Indian rubber back to flesh. Decidedly, he has had too much wine, I thought. I did not know what answer to make this queer question. How could I tell whether he was capable of being retransformed? You look very much puzzled, Miss Eyre. Though you are not pretty any more than I am handsome, yet a puzzled air becomes you. Besides, it is convenient, for it keeps those searching eyes of yours away from my physiognomy. I'm sorry, I really keep messing that up. Physiognomy. And busies them with the worsted flowers of the rug. So, puzzle on. Young lady, I am disposed to be gregarious and communicative tonight. With this announcement, he rose from his chair and stood leaning his arm on the marble mantelpiece. In that attitude, his shape was seen plainly, as well as his face. His unusual breadth of chest, disproportionate almost to his length of limb. I am sure most people would have thought him an ugly man. Yet there was so much unconscious pride in his port, so much ease in his demeanor, such a look of complete indifference to his own external appearance, so haughty and reliance on power of other qualities, intrinsic or adventitious, to atone for the lack of mere personal attractiveness, that in looking at him, one inevitably shared the indifference, and even a blind, imperfect sense, good faith in that confidence. "I am disposed to be gregarious and communicative tonight," he repeated, "and that is why I sent for you. The fire and the chandelier were not sufficient company for me, nor would Pilate have been, for none of these can talk. Adele is a degree better, but still far below the mark. Mrs. Fairfax ditto. You, I am persuaded, can suit me if you will. You puzzled me on the first evening I invited you down here. I have almost forgotten you since. Other ideas have driven yours from my head, but tonight I am resolved to be at ease, to dismiss what importunes, and recall what pleases. It would please me now to draw you out, to learn more of you. Therefore, speak." Instead of speaking, I smiled, and not a very complacent or submissive smile either. "Speak," he urged. "What about, sir?" "Whatever you like. I leave both the choice of subject and manner of treating it entirely to yourself." Accordingly, I sat and said nothing. If he expects me to talk for the mere sake of talking and showing off, he will find he has addressed himself to the wrong person, I thought. "You are dumb, Miss Eyre." I was dumb still. He bent his head a little towards me, and with a single hasty glance seemed to dive into my eyes. "Stubborn," he said, "and annoyed. Ah, it is consistent. I put my request in an absurd, almost insolent form. Miss Eyre, I beg your pardon. The fact is, once for all, I don't wish to treat you like an inferior. That is," correcting himself, "I claim only to be such superiority as much result from 20 years' difference in age, and a century's advance in experience. This legitimate étiquette, as Adele would say. It is by virtue of the superiority, and this alone that I desire you to have the virtue, the goodness, to talk to me a little now, and divert my thoughts, which are galled with dwelling on one point, cankering as a rusty nail." He had deigned on an explanation, almost an apology, and I did not feel insensible to his condescension, and would not seem so. "I am willing to amuse you, if I can, sir. Quite willing. But I cannot introduce a topic, because how do I know what will interest you? Ask me questions, and I will do my best to give them answer." "Then, in the first place, do you agree with me that I have a right to be a little masterful, abrupt, perhaps exacting, sometimes on the grounds I have stated, namely that I am old enough to be your father, and that I have battled through a varied experience with many men of many nations and roamed over half the globe, while you have lived quietly with one set of people in one house. Do as you please, sir. That is no answer. Or rather, it is very irritating. Because a very evasive one. Reply clearly. I don't think so, sir. You have a right to command me, merely because you are older than I, or because you have seen more of the world than I have. Your claim to superiority depends on the use you have made of your time and experience. Promptly spoken, but I won't allow that. Seeing that it would never suit my case, as I have made an indifferent, not to say a bad use of both advantages. Leaving superiority out of the question, then, you must still agree to receive my orders now and then, without being piqued or hurt by the tone of command with you. I smiled. I thought to myself, Mr. Rochester is peculiar, because he seems to forget that he pays me £30 per annum for receiving his orders. That smile is very well, said he, catching instantly the passing expression. But speak to. I was thinking, sir, that very few masters would trouble themselves to inquire whether or not their paid subordinates were piqued and hurt by their orders. Paid subordinate? What, you are my paid subordinate, are you? Ah, yes, I've forgotten the salary. Well, then, on that mercenary ground, will you agree to let me hector you a little? Hector a little. No, sir, not on that ground, but on the ground that you did forget it, and that you care whether or not a dependent is comfortable in his dependency. I agree heartily. And will you consent to dispense with a great many conventional forms and phrases without thinking that the omission arises from insolence? I am sure, sir, I should never mistake informality for insolence. One I rather like, the other nothing free-born would submit to, even for a salary. Humbug. Most things free-born will submit to anything for a salary, therefore keep it to yourself, and don't venture on generalities of which you are intensely ignorant. However, I mentally shake hands with you for your answer, despite its inaccuracy. And as much for the matter in which it was said, as for the substance of the speech, the manner was frank and sincere. One does not often see such a manner. No, on the contrary. Affection, or coldness, or stupid, coarse-minded misapprehension of one's meaning are usual rewards for candor. Not 3 to 3,000 raw schoolgirl governesses would have answered me as you have just done. But I don't mean to flatter you. If you are cast in a different mold to the majority, it is no merit of yours. Nature did it. Then, after all, I go too fast in my conclusions, for which I yet know. You may be no better than the rest. You may have intolerable defects to counterbalance your few points. And so may you, I thought. My eye met his at the idea crossed my mind. He seemed to read my glance, answering it as if its import had been spoken as well as imagined. Yes, you're right, said he. I have plenty of faults of my own. I know it. And I don't wish to palliate them, I assure you. God wot I need not be too severe about others. I have past experience, a series of deeds, a color of life to contemplate within my own breast, which might well call my sneers and censures from my neighborhoods to myself. I started, or rather, for the like of other defaulters, I like to lay half the blame on ill fortune and adverse circumstances, was thrust on to wrong tack at the age of 21. and have never recovered the right course since. But I might have been very different. I might have been as good as you, wiser, almost stainless. I envy you your peace of mind, your clean conscience, your unpolluted memory. Little girl, a memory without blot or contamination must be an exquisite treasure, an inexhaustible source of pure refreshment, is it not? How was your memory when you were 18, sir? All right, then. Limpid. Salubrious. No gush of bilge water had turned me into fetid puddle. I was your equal at 18, quite your equal. Nature meant to me on the whole, a good man, Miss Eyre. One of the better end. And you see, I am not so. You would say you don't see it. At least, I flatter myself I read as much in your eye. Beware, by the by, what you express in that organ. I am quick at interpreting its language. Then take my word for it. I am not a villain. You are not to oppose that, not to attribute me any such bad eminence, but owing, I verily believe, rather to circumstances than to my natural bent, I am trite, commonplace sinner, hackneyed in all the poor petty dissipations with which the rich and worthless try to put on life. Do you wonder that I avow this to you? Know that in the course of your future life you will often find yourself elected the involuntary confidant of your acquaintances' secrets. People will instinctively find out, as I have done, that it is not your forte to talk of yourself, and to listen while others talk of themselves. They will, too, that you listened with no malevolent scorn of their indiscretion, but with a kind of innate sympathy, not the less comforting and encouraging, because it is very unobtrusive in its manifestations. How do you know? How can you guess all this, sir? I know it well. Therefore I proceed almost as freely as if I were writing my thoughts in a diary. Would you say I should have been superior to circumstances? So I should. But you see, I was not. When fate wronged me, I had not the wisdom to remain cool. I turned desperate, then I degenerated. Now, when any vicious simpleton excites my disgust by his paltry ribaldry, I cannot flatter myself that I am better than he. I am forced to confess that he and I are on a level. I wish I had stood firm. God knows I do. Dread remorse. When you are tempted to err, Miss Eyre, remorse is the poison of life. Repentance is said to be its cure, sir. It is not a cure. Reformation may be its cure, and I could reform, I have strength yet for that, but where is the use of thinking it? Hampered, burdened, cursed as I am? Besides, since happiness is irrevocably denied me, I have a right to get pleasure out of life, and I will get it, cost what it may. Then you will degenerate more, sir. Possibly. Yet why should I, if I can get sweet, fresh pleasure? And I may get it as sweet and fresh as the wild honey the bee gathers on the moor. It will sting. It will taste bitter, sir. How do you know? You've never tried it. How very serious, how very solemn you look. And you are as ignorant of the manner as this cameo head, taking one from the mantelpiece. You have no right to preach to me. You neophyte, that have not passed the porch of life, and are absolutely unacquainted with its mysteries. I only remind you of your own words, sir. You said Eyre brought remorse, and you pronounced remorse the poison of existence. And who talks of Eyre now? I scarcely think the notion that flitted across my brain was an error. I believe it was an inspiration rather than a temptation. It is very genial, very soothing, I know that. Here it comes again. It is no devil, I assure you, or if it be, it has put on the robes of an angel of light. I think I must admit so far, guest, when it asks entrance to my heart. Distrust it, sir. It is not a true angel. Once more, how do you know? By what instinct do you pretend to distinguish fallen seraph of the abyss and a messenger from the eternal throne between a guide and a seducer? I judged by your countenance, sir, which is troubled when you said the suggestion had returned upon you. I feel sure it will work you more misery if you listen to it. Not at all. It bears the most gracious message in the world. For the rest, you are not my conscious keepers, so don't make yourself uneasy. Here, come in, bonny wanderer. He said this as if he spoke to a vision, viewless to an eye but his own. Then folding his arms, which he half extended on his chest, he seemed to enclose in their embrace the invisible being. Now, he continued, again addressing me, I have received the pilgrim, a disguised deity as I verily believe. Already it has done me good. My heart was a sort of charnel. It will now be a shrine. To speak truth, sir, I don't understand you at all. I cannot keep up with the conversation, because it has got out of my depth. Only one thing I know, you said you were not as good as you should like to be, and that you regretted your own imperfection. One thing I can comprehend. You intimated that to have a solid memory was a perpetual bane. It seems to me that if you tried hard, you would in time find it possible to become what you yourself would approve, and that if from this day you began with resolution to correct your thoughts and actions, you would in a few years be laid up a new and stainless store of recollections, to which you might revert with pleasure. Justly thought. Rightly said, Miss Eyre, and in this moment, I am paving hell with energy. Sir? I am laying down good intentions, which I believe durable as flint. Certainly my associates in pursuits shall be other than they have been. And better? And better. So better as one oar is than foul dross. You seem to doubt me. I don't doubt myself. I know what my aim is, what my motives are, and at this moment I pass a law, unalterable as that of Medes and Persians, that both are right. They cannot be, sir, if they require a new statute to legalize them. They are, Miss Eyre. Though they absolutely require a new statute. Unheard of combinations of circumstances demand unheard of rules. That sounds like a dangerous maxim, sir. Because one can see at once that it is liable to abuse. sententious sage, so it is. But I swear by my household gods not to abuse it. You are human and fallible. I am. So are you. What then? Human and fallible should not arrogate a power with which the divine and perfect alone can be safely entrusted. What power? That of saying of any strange, unsanctioned line of action, let it be right. Let it be right. The very words you have pronounced them. May it be right, I said, as I rose, deeming it useless to continue a discourse which was all darkness to me, and besides sensible that the character of my interlocutor was beyond my penetration, at least beyond its present reach, and feeling the uncertainty, the vague sense of insecurity, which accompanies a conviction of ignorance. Where are you going? To put Adele to bed. It is past her bedtime. You are afraid of me because I talk like a sphinx. Your language is enigmatical. Your language is enigmatical, sir. But though I am bewildered, I am certainly not afraid. You are afraid. Your self-love dreads a blunder. In that sense, I do feel apprehensive. I have no wish to talk nonsense. But if you did, it would be in such a grave, quiet manner, I should mistake it for sense. Do you never laugh, Miss Eyre? Don't trouble yourself to answer. I see you laugh rarely, but you can laugh very merrily. Believe me, you are not naturally austere, any more than I am naturally vicious. The lowered constraint still clings to you somewhat, controlling your features, muffling your voice, restricting your limbs, and you fear in the presence of a man and a brother or father or master what you will. To smile gaily, speak too freely, or move too quickly. But in time, I think you will learn to be natural with me. I think you will learn to be natural with me, as I find it impossible to be conventional with you. And then your looks and movements will have more vivacity and variety than they dare offer now. I see at intervals the glance of a curious sort of bird through the close-set bars of a cage. A vivid, restless, resolute captive is there. Were it but free, it could soar cloud high. You are still bent on going? It has struck 9, sir. Never mind. Wait a minute. Adele is not ready to go to bed yet. My position, Miss Eyre, with my back to the fire, with my face to the room, favors observation. While talking to you, I have occasionally watched Adele. I have my own reasons for thinking her a curious study. Reasons I may, nay, that I shall impart to you someday. She pulled out of her box about 10 minutes ago a little silk frock. Rapture lit her face as she unfolded it. Coquetry runs in her blood, blends with her brains, and seasons the marrow of her bones. Il faut que je le sais, cried she. Établissant Mem? And she rushed out of the room. She is now with Sophie, undergoing a robing process. In a few minutes she will enter, and I know what I shall see. A mini Céline Varens, as she used to appear on the boards of the Rising. But never mind. However, my tenderest feelings are about to receive a shock, such as to my presentiment. Stay now, to see whether it will be realized. Ere long, Adele's little foot was heard tripping across the hall. She re-entered, transformed as her guardian had predicted, a dress of rose-colored satin, very short, and as full in the skirt as it could be gathered, replaced the brown frock she had previously worn. A wreath of rosebuds circled her forehead. Her feet were dressed in silk stockings and small white satin sandals. Ese que ma robe. Oh. Ese que ma robe va bien, she cried, bounding forwards. It me solier. It me va. It me spas. Tenez. Je crois que je vas danser. And spreading out her dress, she chassed across the room, till having reached Mr. Rochester, she wheeled lightly before him, on tiptoe, then dropped on one knee at his feet, exclaiming, Monsieur, je vous remercie mille fois de votre bonté. Then rising, she added, C'est comme cela que maman fait ça. N'est-ce pas, monsieur? Precisely, was the answer. And comme cela, she charmed my English gold out of my British breeches pocket. I have been green too, Miss Eyre. Grass green. Not a more vernal tint freshens you now than once freshened me. My spring is gone, however, but it has left me that French floweret on my hands, which, in some moods, I would fain be rid of, not valuing now that root when it sprang, having found it was a sort of nothing but gold dust could manure. I have but a half liking to the blossom, especially when it looks so artificial, just as now. I keep it and rear it rather on the Roman Catholic principle of expiating numerous sins, great or small, by one good work. I'll explain all this some day. Good night. Chapter 15. Mr. Rochester did, on a future occasion, explain it. It was one afternoon when he chanced to meet me and Adele in the grounds, and while she played with Pilot and her shuttlecock, he asked me to walk upstairs and down a long beech avenue within sight of her. Then he said that she was the daughter of a French opera dancer, Céline Varens, towards whom he had once cherished what he called a grand passion. This passion Céline had professed in return with even superior ardor. He thought himself her idol, ugly as he was. He believed, as he said, that she preferred his taille d'athlété to the elegance of the Apollo Belvedere. And Messiah, so much was I flattered by this preference of the Gallic sylph for her British gnome, that I installed in her a hotel, gave me a complete establishment of servants, a carriage, cashmeres, diamonds, dentelles, etc. In short, I began the process of ruining myself in received style, like any other spoonie. I had not, it seems, the originality chalked out a new road to shame and destruction, but trode the old track with stupid exactness not to deviate an inch from the beaten center. I had, as I deserved to have, the fate of all other spoonies. Happening to call one evening when Celine did not expect me, I found her out. But it was a warm night, and I was tired with strolling through Paris, so I sat down in her boudoir, happy to breathe the air consecrated so lately by her presence. No, I exaggerate. I never thought there was any consecrating virtue about her. It was rather a sort of pastier perfume she had left, a scent of musk and amber, then an odor of sanctity. I was just beginning to stifle the fumes of conservatory flowers and sprinkled essences, when I bethought myself to open a window and step out on the balcony. It was moonlight, gaslight beside, and very still and serene. The balcony was furnished with a chair or two. I sat down, took out a cigar. I'll take one now, if you excuse. He ensued a pause, filled up by the producing and lighting of a cigar, having placed it to his lips and breathed a trail of Havana incense on the freezing and sunless air. He went on. I liked bonbons in those days too, Messiah. I was a croquant. Overlook the barbarianism. Croquant chocolate confits. And smoking alternatively, watching meantime the equipages that rolled along the fashionable streets toward neighboring opera house, ran in an elegant close carriage drawn by a beautiful pair of English horses, and distinctly seen in the brilliant city light, I recognized the voiture I had given Celine. She was returning, of course. My heart thumped and impatient against the iron rails I leant on. The carriage stopped, as I had expected, at the hotel door. My flame, that is the very word for an opera innamorata, alighted, though muffled in a cloak, unnecessary unencumbrance by the by, on so warm a June evening. I knew her instantly by her little foot, seen peeping from the skirt of her dress as she skipped from the carriage step. Bending over the angle, I was about to murmur, Mon ange, in the tone, of course, which should be audible to the ear of love alone, when a figure jumped from the carriage after her, cloaked also, but that was a spurred heel which had rung on the pavement, and that was a hatted head which now passed under the arched porte-conquer of the hotel. You never felt jealousy, did you, Messiah? Of course not. I need not ask you, because you've never felt love. You have both sentiments yet to experience. Your soul sleeps, the shock is yet to be given which shall wake it. You think all existence lapse as quiet a flow that in your youth has hitherto slid away, floating on with closed eyes and muffled ears. You never see the rocks bristling not far in the bed of a flood, nor hear the breakers boil at the base. But I tell you, and you may mark my words, you will come a day to a craggy pass in the channel, where the whole life stream will be broken up into whirl and tumult, foam and noise. Either you will be dashed to atoms on crag points, or lifted up and borne on by some master wave into a calmer current, as I am now. I like this day. I like that sky of steel. I like the sternness and stillness of the world under this forest. I like Thornfield, its antiquity, its retirement, its old crow teas and old thorn trees, its grey facade, the lines of dark windows reflecting the meadowwoken. And yet how long have I abhorred the very thought of it, shunned it, like a great plague house. How I do still abhor. He ground his teeth and was silent. He arrested his step and struck his boot against the hard ground. Some hated thought seemed to have him in its grip, and told him, and to hold him so tightly that he could not advance. We were ascending the avenue when he thus paused, the hall before us. Lifting his eye to his battlements, he cast over them a glare such as I had never saw before or since. Pain, shame, ire, impatience, disgust, detestation seemed momentarily to hold a quivering conflict in the large pupil dilating under his ebon eyebrow. Wild was the wrestle which should be paramount, but another feeling rose and triumphed, something hard and cynical, self-willed and resolute. It settled his passion and petrified his countenance. He went on. During the moment I was silent, Miss Eyre, I was arranging a point with Destiny. She stood there, by that beached trunk, a hag, like one of those who appeared to Macbeth on the hearth of Forres. You like Thornfield, she said, lifting her finger. And then she wrote in the air a memento, which ran in lurid hieroglyphics all along the house front, between the upper and lower rows of windows. Like it if you can, like it if you dare. I will like it, said I. I dare like it, and... He subjoined moodily. I will keep my word. I will break obstacles to happiness, to goodness. Yes, goodness. I wish to be a better man than I have been, than I am, as Job's Leviathan broke the spear, the dart, and the habergon, hindrances which others count as irons and brass. I will esteem but straw and rotten wood. Adele here ran before him with her shuttlecock. Away, he cried harshly. Keep at distance, child, or go to Sophie. Continuing then to pursue his walk in silence, I ventured to recall him to the point whence he had abruptly diverged. Did you leave the balcony, sir? I asked. When Mademoiselle Varens entered? I had expected a rebuff for this hardly well-timed question, but, on the contrary, waking out of his scowling abstraction, he turned his eyes toward me. The shade seemed to clear off his brow. Oh, I had forgotten Céline. Well, to resume. When I saw my charmer thus come in accompanied by a cavalier, I seemed to hear a hiss, and the green snake of jealousy, riding on and undulating coils from the moonlit balcony, glided within my waistcoat and ate its way 2 minutes to my heart's core. Strange, he exclaimed, suddenly starting again from this point. Strange that I should choose for the confidant of all this, young lady. Passing strange that you should listen to me quietly as if it were the most usual thing in the world for a man like me to tell you stories of his opera mistress to a quaint, inexperienced girl like you. But the last singularity explains the first. As I intimated once before, you, with your gravity, considerateness, and caution, were made to be a recipient of secrets. Besides, I know what sort of mind I have placed in communication with my own. I know it is not one liable to take infection. It is a peculiar mind. It is a unique one. Happily, I do not mean to harm it, but if I did, I would not take harm from me. The more you and I converse, the better, for while I cannot blight you, you may refresh me. After this digression, he proceeded. I remained in the balcony. They came to her boudoir, no doubt, I thought. Let me prepare an ambush. So putting my hand through the open window, I'd draw the curtain over it, leaving only an opening through which I could take observations. Then I closed the casement all but a chink wide open, enough to furnish an outlet to lovers' whispered vows. Then I stole back to my chair. As I resumed it, the pair came in. My eye was quickly at the aperture. Celine's chambermaid entered, lit a lamp, left it on the table, and withdrew. The couple were thus revealed to me clearly. Both removed their cloaks, and there was the Varens shining in satin jewels, my gifts, of course, and there was her companion in an officer's uniform, and I knew him from a young raw of Vicomte, a brainless and vicious youth whom I had sometimes met in society, and never thought of hating because I despised him so absolutely. On recognizing him, the fang of the snake, jealousy, was instantly broken, because at the same moment my love for Celine sank under an extinguisher. A woman who could betray me for such a rival was not worth contending for. She deserved only scorn, less, however, than I, who had been her dupe. They began to talk. Their conversations eased me completely. Frivolous, mercenary, heartless, senseless, it was rather calculated to weary than enrage a listener. A card of mine lay on the table. This being perceived brought my name under discussion. Neither of them possessed energy or wit to belabor me soundly, but they insulted me coarsely, as they could in their little way. Especially Celine, who even waxed rather brilliant on my personal defects, deformities she termed them. Now it had been her custom to launch out into fervent admiration of what she called my tout mal, wherein she differed diametrically from you, who told me point blank at the second interview that you did not think me handsome. The contrast struck me at the time. Adele here came running up again. Monsieur, John has just been to say that your agent has called and wishes to see you. Ah, in that case, I must abridge. Opening the window, I walked in upon them, liberated Celine from my protection, gave her notice to vacate her hotel, offered her a purse of immediate exigencies, disregarded screams, hysterics, prayers, protestations, convulsions, made an appointment with the Vicomte for a meeting at the Bois de Boulogne. Next morning I had the pleasure of encountering him, left a bullet in one of his poor etiolated arms, feeble as the wing of a chicken in a pip. Then I thought I had done with the whole crew, but unlikely the Baron 6 months before had given me filet en Adele, who affirmed she was my daughter. And perhaps she may be, though I see no proofs of such grim paternity written in her countenance. Pilot is more like me than she. Some years after I had broken with the mother, she abandoned her child to run away to Italy with a musician or a singer. I acknowledge no natural claim on Adele's part to be supported by me, nor do I now acknowledge any, for I am not her father. But hearing that she was quite destitute, I took the poor thing out of the slime and mud of Paris, transplanted it here, to grow up clean in the wholesome soil of an English country garden. Mrs. Fairfax found you to train it, and now you know that it is the illegitimate offering of a French opera girl. You will perhaps think differently of your post and protégé. Will you place that you beg me to look out for a new governess, etc.? No, Adele is not answerable for either her mother's faults or yours. I have a regard for her, and now that I know she is, in a sense, parentless, forsaken by her mother, disowned by you, sir, I shall cling closer to her than before. How could I possibly prefer the sports pet of a wealthy family, would hate her governess as a nuisance, to a lonely little orphan who leans towards her as a friend? Ah, that is the light in which you view it. Well, I must go now. And you too. It darkens. But I stayed out a few minutes longer with Adele and Pilot, ran a race with her, played a game of battledore and shuttlecock. When we went in, I had removed her bonnet and coat. I took her on my knee, kept her there an hour, allowing her to prattle as she liked, not rebuking even some little freedoms and frivolities into which she was apt to stray when much noticed, but which betrayed in her a superficiality of character, inherited probably from her mother, hardly congenial to an English maid. Still, she had her merits, and I was disposed to appreciate all that was good in her to the utmost. I sought in her countenance the features a likeness to Mr. Rochester, but found none. No trait, no turn of expression announced relationship. It was a pity. If she could but have been proved to resemble him, he would have thought more of her. It was not till after I had withdrawn to my own chamber for the night that I steadily reviewed the tale Mr. Rochester had told me. As he had said, there was probably nothing at all extraordinary in the substance of the narrative itself. A wealthy Englishman's passion for a French dancer, and her treachery to him, were everyday matters enough, no doubt, in society. But there was something decidedly strange in the paroxysm of emotion which had suddenly seized him when he was in the act of expressing the present contentment of his mood, and his newly revived pleasure in the old hall and its environs. I meditated wonderingly on this incident, but gradually quitting it, as I found it for the present inexplicable. I turned to the consideration of my master's manner to myself. The confidence he had thought fit to repose in me seemed a tribute to my discretion. I regarded and accepted it as such. His deportment had now for some weeks been uniform toward me than the first. I never seemed in his way. He did not take fits of chilling hauteur. When he met me unexpectedly, the encounter seemed welcome. He had always a word, and seems sometimes a smile for me, when summoned by formal invitation to his presence. I was honored by a cordiality of reception that made me feel I really possessed the power to amuse him, and that these evenings' conferences were sought as much for his pleasure as for my benefit. I indeed talked comparatively little, but I heard him talk with relish. It was his nature to be communicative. He liked to open to a mind unacquainted with the world glimpses of its scenes and ways. I do not mean its corrupt scenes and wicked ways, but such as derived their interest from the great scale on which they were acted, the strange novelty by which they were characterized. And I had keen delight in receiving the new ideas he offered, in imagining the new pictures he portrayed, and following him in thought through the new regions he disclosed, never startled or troubled by a noxious illusion. The ease of his manner freed me from painful restraint. The friendly frankness, as correct and cordial, with which he treated me, drew me to him. I felt a few times as if he were my relation rather than my master, yet he was imperious sometimes still, and I did not mind. I saw it was his way, so happy, so gratified. Did I become, with this new interest added to life, that I ceased to pine after kindred. My thin crescent destiny seemed to enlarge. The banks of existence were filled up. My bodily health improved. I gathered flesh and strength. And was Mr. Rochester now ugly in my eyes? No, reader. Gratitude and many associations, all pleasurable and genial, made his face the object I liked best to see. His presence in a room was more cheering than the brightest fire. Yet I had not forgotten his faults indeed. I could not, for he brought them up frequently before me. He was proud, sardonic, harsh, to inferiority of every description. In my secret soul I knew that his kindness to me was balanced by unjust severity to many others. He was moody, too, unaccountably so. I more than once, when sent for to read to him, found him sitting in his library alone with his head bent on his folded arms, and when he looked up, a morose, almost malignant scowl blackened his features. But I believed that his moodiness, his harshness, his former faults of morality, I say former, for now he seemed to have corrected them, and their source in some cruel cross of fate. I believed he was naturally a man of better tendencies, higher principles, and purer tastes than such as circumstances had developed, education instilled, or destiny encouraged. I thought there were excellent materials in him, though for the present they hung together somewhat spoiled and tangled. I cannot deny that I grieved for his grief, whatever that was, and would have given much to assuage it. Though I had now extinguished my candle and was lied down in bed, I could not sleep, for thinking of his look when he paused in the avenue, and told how his destiny had risen up before him and dared him to be happy at Thornfield. Why not? I asked myself. What alienates him from the house? Will he leave it again soon? Will... Mrs. Fairfax said he had seldom stayed here longer than a fortnight at a time, and he has now been a resident 8 weeks. If he does go, the change will be doleful. Suppose he should be absent spring, summer, and autumn. How joyless sunshine and fine days will seem. I hardly know whether I slept or not after this musing. At any rate, I started wide awake on hearing a vague murmur. Peculiar and lugubrious, which sounded, I thought, just above me. I wished I had kept my candle burning. The night was drearily dark. My spirits were depressed. I rose and sat up in bed, listening. The sound was hushed. I tried again to sleep. My heart beat anxiously. My inward tranquility was broken. The clock far down the hall struck 2. Just then it seemed my chamber door was touched, as if fingers had swept the panels and groping away along the dark gallery outside. I said, "Who is there?" Nothing answered. I was chilled with fear. All at once, I remembered the pilot might be, who, when the kitchen door chanced to be left open, not unfrequently found his way up to the threshold of Mr. Rochester's chamber. I had seen him lying there myself in the mornings. The idea calmed me somewhat. I lay down. Silence composes the nerves. And as an unbroken hush now reigned again through the whole house, I began to feel the return of slumber, but it was not fated that I should sleep that night. A dream had scarcely approached my ear when it fled, affrighted, scared by the marrow freezing incident enough. This was a demoniac laugh, low, suppressed, and deep, uttered as it seemed at the very keyhole of my chamber door. The head of my bed was near the door, and I thought at first the goblin laughter stood at my bedside, for rather, crouched by my pillow, but I rose, looked round, and could see nothing, while, as I still gazed, the unnatural sound was reiterated. I knew it came from behind the panels. My first impulse was to rise and fasten the bolt. My next, again, to cry out, "Who is there?" Something gurgled and moaned. Ere long steps retreated up the gallery towards the 3rd-story staircase. A door had lately been made to shut in that staircase. I heard it open and closed, and all was still. Was that Grace Poole? And is she possessed with the devil? Thought I. Impossible now to remain longer by myself. I must go to Mrs. Fairfax. I hurried on my frock and shawl. I withdrew the bolt and opened the door with a trembling hand. There was a candle burning just outside, left on the matting of the gallery. I was surprised at this circumstance, but still more was I amazed to perceive the air quite dim, as if filled with smoke, and while looking to the right and left to find whence these blue wreaths issued, I became further aware of a strong smell of burning. Something creaked. It was a door ajar, and that door was Mr. Rochester's. The smoke rushed in a cloud from thence. I thought no more of Mrs. Fairfax. I thought no more of Grace Poole or the laugh. In that instant, I was in the chamber. Tongues of flame darted round the bed. The curtains were on fire. In the midst of blaze and vapor, Mr. Rochester lay stretched motionless, deep in sleep. "Wake! Wake!" I cried. I shook him, but he only murmured and turned, The smoke had stupefied him. Not a moment could be lost. The very sheets were kindling. I rushed his basin and ewer. Fortunately, one was wide and the other deep, and both were filled with water. I heaved them up, deluged the bed and its occupant, flew back to my own room, brought my own water jug, baptized the couch afresh, and by God's aid succeeded in extinguishing the flames which were devouring it. The hiss of the quenched element, the breakage of pitcher, which I flung from my hand when I had emptied it, above all the splash of the shower bath I had liberally bestowed, roused Mr. Rochester at last. Though it was dark, I knew he was awake, because I heard him fulminating strange anathemas in finding himself lying in a pool of water. "Is there a flood?" he cried. "No, sir," I answered. "But there has been a fire. Get up, do. You are quenched now. You'll fetch a candle." "I will fetch you a candle." "In the name of all the elves in Christendom, is that Jane Eyre?" he demanded. "What have you done to me? Witch? Sorceress? Who is in the room beside you? Have you plotted to drown me?" "I will fetch you a candle, sir, and in heaven's name get up. Somebody has plotted something. You cannot too soon find out what and who it is." "There, I am up now. But at your peril, fetch a candle yet. Wait 2 minutes till I get into some dry garments, and if there are any dry, yes, there's my dressing gown. Now run." I did run. I brought the candle which still remained in the gallery. He took it from my hand, held it up, and surveyed the bed. All blackened and scorched, the sheets drenched, the carpet round swimming in water. "What is it? And who did it?" he asked. I briefly related to him what had transpired. The strange laugh I had heard in the gallery, the step ascending to the 3rd story, the smoke, the smell of fire which had conducted me to his room, in which state I found matters there, and how I how the hell do you say this word? Deluged him with all the water I could lay hands on. He listened very gravely. His face, as I went on, expressed more concern than astonishment. He did not immediately speak when I concluded. "Shall I call Mrs. Fairfax?" I asked. "Mrs. Fairfax? No. What the deuce do you call her for? What can she do? Let her sleep unmolested." "Then I will fetch Leah and wake John and his wife." "Not at all. Just be still. You have a shawl on. If you're not warm enough, you may take my cloak yonder, wrap it around you, and sit down in the armchair. There. I will put it on. Now place your feet on the stool and keep them out of the wet. I'm going to leave you a few minutes. I shall take the candle. Remain where you are till I return. Be as still as a mouse. I must pay a visit to the 2nd story. Don't move, remember, or call anyone." He went. I watched the light withdraw. He passed up the gallery very softly, unclosed the staircase door with as little noise as possible, shut it after him, and the last ray vanished. I was left in total darkness. I listened for some noise, but I heard nothing. A very long time elapsed. I grew weary. It was quite cold, in spite of the cloak, and then I did not see use of staying, and I was not to rouse the house. I was on the point of risking Mr. Rochester's displeasure by disobeying his orders, when the light once gleamed dimly on the gallery wall, and I heard his unshod feet tread the matting. I hope it is he, thought I, and not something worse. He re-entered, pale and gloomy. I found it all out, said he, setting his candle down on the washstand. It is as I thought. How, sir? He made no reply, but stood with his arms folded, Looking on the ground, at the end of a few minutes he inquired in a rather peculiar tone. "I forget whether you said you saw anything when you opened your chamber door." "No, sir. Only the candlestick on the ground." "But you heard an odd laugh? You've heard that laugh before, I should think, or something like it?" "Yes, sir. There's a woman who sews here, called Grace Poole. She laughs just that way. She is a singular person." "Just so. Grace Poole. You have guessed it. She is, as you say, singular. Very. Well, I shall reflect on the subject. Meantime, I am glad that you are the only person besides myself acquainted with the precise details of tonight's incident. You are no talking fool. Say nothing about it. I will account for this state of affairs," pointing to the bed. "And now return to your own room. I shall do very well on the sofa in the library for the rest of the night. It is near 4. 2 hours the servants will be up." "Good night, then, sir," said I, departing. He seemed very surprised, very inconsistently so, as he had just told me to go. "What?" he exclaimed. "Are you quitting me already? In that way?" "You said I might go, sir." "But not without taking leave. Not without a word or two of acknowledgement and goodwill, not, in short, in that brief, dry fashion. You have saved my life, snatched me from the horrible, excruciating death. You walked past me, as if we were mutual strangers. At least shake hands." He held out his hand. I gave him mine. He took it first in one, then both his own. "You've saved my life. I have a pleasure in owing you so immense a debt. I cannot say more, nothing else that has being would have been tolerable to me in the character of creditor for such an obligation. But you, it is different. I feel your benefits no burden, Jane." He paused, gazed at me. Words almost visible trembled on his lips, but his voice was checked. "Good night again, sir. There is no debt, benefit, burden, obligation in the case." "I knew," he continued, "you would do me good in some way, at some time. I saw it in your eyes when I first beheld you. Their expression and smile did not." Again he stopped. "Did not," he proceeded hastily, "strike to light to my very inmost heart for nothing. People talk of natural sympathies. I have heard a good guinea. There are grains of truth in the most wildest fable. My cherished preserver. Good night." Strange energy was in his voice. Strange fire in his look. "I'm glad I happened to be awake," I said, and then I was going. "What? You will go?" "I am cold, sir." "Cold? Ah, yes. And standing in a pool. Go then, Jane. Go." But he still retained my hand, and I could not free it. I bethought myself of an expedient. "I think I hear Mrs. Fairfax move, sir," said I. "Well, leave me." He relaxed his fingers, and I was gone. I regained my couch, but never thought of sleep till morning dawned. I was tossed on a buoyant and unquiet sleep, where billows of trouble rolled under surges of joy. I thought sometimes I saw beyond its wild waters a shore, sweet as the hills of Bela, and now and then a freshening gale wakened by hope bore my spirit triumphantly towards the bourne. But I could not reach it, even in a fancy. A counteracting breeze blew off land, and continually drove me back. Sense would resist delirium, judgment would warn passion. Too feverish to rest, I rose as soon as day dawned,